Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Ross again, coming at you with some more research, ethics, and responsible conduct of research training for Biology 104, Cell Biology and Genetics Laboratory. So we're almost to the end. This is the 5th week out of 6. And this week, we're going to talk about authorship. This is not something that's often covered in undergraduate classes. So you may have talked about lab notebook maintenance, as we talked about last week, in a lot of different classes. You may understand the principles of plagiarism, but authorship may be a new one for you. And I'm, again, as every week, going to guarantee that you are going to learn something new that will help you in this class in particular, but as well as your future, both in school and also hopefully in life, especially if you decide to go into academia, but that's just an aside. So this week, let's talk about authorship. And as always, I've got a shared Google Doc. You must be signed in using your Fresno State Gmail credentials to access it. This is for asynchronous participation for those of you that are joining us after class or outside of the class hours. So that Google Doc can be found at tinyurl.com/F, the numeral 2 and the numeral 1, and then RECR and the numeral 5. So that's tinyurl.com/F21, fall 2021, RECR, and then 5 for the week number, week 5, F21 RECR 5. The reason that we're talking about authorship this week, even though it's already the 5th week of the semester, is that you may be working in a group this semester and you may wind up creating a group lab report, written, or you may be working on a group oral presentation this semester. So you've worked on group projects before, I'm sure. And whether or not you like group projects, this is a really important topic because this comes up all the time in research. When any group of individuals wants to have an oral presentation or publish a research manuscript like you would find in a scientific journal, two questions have to be asked. One is, who are the authors going to be? Who merits having their name on the front page? And then the second, and maybe less important, but still important question is, what order do the names go in, and how do you decide, and how do you know what the order of importance is? Like, is it better to be first author or last author? So those are things we're going to talk about today. So I'll ask you now to pause the video, as usual, go back to that Google Doc and provide a little bit of brainstorming feedback on why you think, based on that very brief description of authorship, why is the concept of authorship important in research and in science? And then separately, but related, can you think of any ways or reasons that authorship is a contentious issue, that it's something that's sometimes fraught with arguments and debates and sometimes hurt feelings? So please pause the video now, go enter a few brainstorming thoughts on the Google Doc, and then come back. All right, welcome back. So I hope you had a reasonable time coming up with some ideas for this. Let's talk about first, why is authorship important? And I've led this conversation in class before, and again, your answers that you put on the Google Doc don't need to match these, but often a student will actually say this verbatim: give credit where credit is due. This is very much like plagiarism, the topic we've already talked about, in the sense that authorship gives credit to the people that did the work that's being published. And that's one of the reasons that authorship can be contentious, because while there can be an infinite number of authors, so if lots of people work on a project, you could make each of them an author, there are reasons not to do that. And so we'll talk about that in a minute or two. Authorship is also important because, as I mentioned earlier in the plagiarism section, authorship is important because publications, oral presentations, and written communication, manuscripts, are the currency of academic research, at least, that professors and graduate students and undergraduate students put these on their resumes or their curriculum vitae, their CVs, to show what an accomplished scientist they are and that they are very productive as a scientist. And so it's important to give credit where credit is due, mainly because there's motivation on the part of scientists to be author on as many publications, or good publications at least, high quality publications, as possible, because being a productive scientist can lead to opportunities to get more funding from funding agencies. When you write to them and ask for funding, all else being equal, if the research proposals from two different authors or scientists are about equally solid, but one of the authors has a stronger track record in getting funding and then publishing results with that funding, it's more likely that they will get the money. Authorship is also important for other reasons, especially in academics, like promotion. So job career advancement sometimes depends on how many papers you were an author on. And so it can get contentious because, as we're about to see, there are some rules or guidelines for what it takes to become an author. So there's a lot of value placed on being an author. And the gray area in who can be an author makes it sometimes contentious in terms of both who's an author and also which order their names come in on the manuscript. So let me walk through a couple of examples of somewhat famous cases that have occasionally brought this concept of authorship back into the spotlight. So here's a publication in the journal Biology Letters. And so that's the citation there. BIOL stands for Biology Letters. This is from 2011. And the title is Black Cotton Bees. And here's the list of the authors. And it's a pretty long list of authors. There's probably, what, 30 names on there or so. The interesting thing, though, is the first author. Who is P.S. Black Cotton? Well, if we follow the reference there, numeral 1, that's Black Cotton Primary School. So public school, Black Cotton, P.S. Black Cotton, the first author. It's an entire, basically, elementary school in England. So they've made an elementary school and essentially all of the students of that elementary school an author. And that's because these scientists that were conducting this research, which are part of some of the individuals that are listed here as the authors that were running the study, wanted to make research more accessible to elementary school. So they say 8 to 10-year-old children here at the top of the right column. So they used students, they engaged students, they just used them. They helped students perform animal behavior experiments using bees to learn something about biology. So the question that this raised was, can elementary school students are they qualified to be? Do they have the intellectual capacity to be? I don't know what the argument is, but should they be authors on published research manuscripts? So some people say, well, why not? They participated. Some people say, well, there are some things that those kids can't do that are required for the author of any scientific manuscript to do. So we're going to look at that in just a minute. I want to show another example. So one other example of a manuscript, this one, you can see the title here is published in the journal Genes, Genomes, and Genetics. So it sounds like a cool paper, Drosophila molar F elements, something about their evolution, but the authors, let's take a look, Wilson Leung and participating students and faculty of the Genomics Education Partnership. The Genomics Education Partnership is a US-wide, maybe even beyond, network of universities and other schools that are funded to participate in a huge research project that essentially different parts of it are distributed across multiple universities and classes, where an instructor can choose to join this program, the Genomics Education Partnership, and they get the resources and supplies and tools and training to take that tiny little chunk of the project and work on it with their students in a class. So you can see the URL here at the bottom of the screen, perhaps, that has the name of this news article in the Nature journal built into the URL. Fruit fly paper has 1,000 authors. So again, raising the question of, is there a limit to the number of authors that you can have on a manuscript? Is this a little bit ridiculous? Here's a screenshot of that full list of authors. So on the left panel here, we have a list of all of the different schools and the semesters and the classes that participated in this paper. And then these are the list of all of those individual students, some undergrad or maybe mostly undergraduate, who participated in the research that's presented in this manuscript. So let's take a look at why those case studies maybe have overstepped the ability to add authors to a manuscript. So here we get into some of the details about rules or guidelines for authorship. So this comes from the International Council or Committee on Medical Journal Ethics, although don't let the medical journal fool you. This is a big organization, and it's influential in the sense that most life sciences, biology, research journals tend to follow these recommendations. So let's take a look, and please, again, pay attention, because these are data that you're going to need to use this semester to decide on authorship criteria for your research project products, like written or oral presentations, as well as for an assignment due next class period. So here are the 4 criteria that ICMJE recommends. So I'm going to emphasize some of these points. Substantial contributions, which is a qualitative word, so no one has defined that. That's up for interpretation. That's why it's ethics. There's a gray area here for us to consider. And then so the contributions, have to be the conception or design of the work. There's a lot of ors in here now. Or the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of data. So they're saying if you helped develop the design of the study, or maybe conceived what the question was, or you helped collect data, analyze data, or interpret data, you have to mark one of those things on that first bullet point, right? So this has to be based on the following 4 criteria. And each of these follows with an and. So what this means is anybody who's going to be an author should be able to check one item on each of these 4 lines. So second, beyond actually participating in the research somehow, you have to draft the work or revise it. That means you help start writing it, or you revise it later after an initial draft is done. Critically, again, here's another gray area word, for important intellectual content. And this might be where that Black Cotton Bees paper gets into potential ethical trouble. This is where a lot of people were saying, well, can public school students do that critical revision? Did they understand the background research on bee vision and memory that they can actually be authors on a scientific manuscript? They probably don't have that background information. So were they able to critically draft or revise the work? They have to give final approval of the version to be published. So in other words, when a manuscript is drafted, the author, whoever the main author is, has to send that version to every single author on the author list. And each of those authors has to read the whole manuscript and certify that they agree to all of the contents and that they agree to be an author on the manuscript. And then finally, that follows with that 4th bullet point, which is that if you agree to be an author, you're basically certifying to the accuracy and integrity of the entire manuscript. In other words, if one author on the manuscript falsified some data and you don't catch it as another author when you review the manuscript, when you say, yeah, I agreed to be an author, that means that you're going down with the ship, colloquially speaking. If at some point in the future, somebody else realizes that there was fraud committed and that paper gets into trouble and say is retracted, it's not just the person that committed, the one author that did the bad thing that gets in trouble. Every author on the manuscript is equally accountable for the fact that fraudulent research got published. So authorship is not something to take lightly. Likewise, there's this concept that I alluded to at the beginning of author order and position and type. So I offer 4 different examples here. These are all publications that I've had as a scientist. So I've got one publication where I'm the sole author. I'm the only author on that manuscript. I've got the second one here, I'm the 4th author of 6. In this third one, I'm the first author of 2. And then on this 4th one, I'm the last author of 3. So although I didn't ask you I didn't provide a prompt on our Google Doc, maybe you can go to the Google Doc now and add some thoughts, make a guess, vote. which of these, let's call these A, B, C, and D. Which of those do you think is best for me as an academic scientist, as a professor? Although these were not all from when I was a professor, these started from when I had just graduated as an undergraduate. So this article B was when I was a research technician, just out of earning my bachelor's degree. C is from when I was earning my doctoral degree. So that was while I was a graduate student. A is from after I became a faculty member at Fresno State. I published that one, as well as article D, which is an article with me as an author, as well as 2 then undergraduates at the time at Fresno State. So if you want, pause now, go to the Google Doc and jot down some thoughts about which of these you think is the best author position for me as a scientist. So take a guess. Come right back. I'll pause for just a minute. Okay, so here is my take on author order, position, and type. Sole author is great. It means you did everything. You conceived the study, you designed the study, you did the experiments, you analyzed the data, you interpreted the data, you wrote the manuscript, you got it published. But you don't see very many of those in the recent days, last few decades, because science has become so much more interdisciplinary. There are almost always multiple authors on a scientific manuscript. The least beneficial in general for scientists is to be a middle author. It means you did some work on the project, but you were neither the lead author. So the first author usually holds the highest regard in terms of the number of authors. The lead author tends to be the person that did the most work on the project, and also often the person that drafted the manuscript. At conferences, the first author tends to be the person that would be giving the oral presentation of a talk, for example, or a poster presentation about the research. So that is looked for very favorably when that person, in this case, Janet Young, is trying to advance her career, for example, to get a promotion, to get a new job, or to go from assistant professor to associate professor to full professor. First authorships are often good. This is not true in every scientific discipline either. In biology and chemistry, first author tends to be best for trainees, for students, for doctoral students, for undergraduate students, for laboratory technicians. But the author order changes depending if you're in engineering, for example. There's a different, in that discipline, in that field of study, there's a different expectation for which type of author did what, which is really interesting, but we don't have time for that now. As a student, this was my most important or impactful paper because I was the first author as a graduate student, and the only other author was my doctoral advisor, Dr. Peichel. So that was the maybe highest profile paper I've ever published. So again, as a trainee, I want to be first author. But D, I would argue, is the most important for me as a faculty member, because the last author is not the person that did the least amount of work, at least in biology and chemistry and related disciplines. The last author is also usually the corresponding author. That means that's the person that has submitted the manuscript to the journal and asked them to review it and consider publishing it. The last author usually is the faculty member that runs the research group, that directs all of the trainees, the students, which are the first, second, third, and so forth authors. The last author is usually also the person that got the funding, applied for and received the funding, or funded it themselves, provided the resources, equipment, space, and support for doing the experiments. So among faculty, last author articles are our currency. They're what we're looking for. So there basically is no wrong answer here. I would say if you chose B, that's the lowest impact manuscript, or one of the lowest impact manuscripts in my career. On this page, that's definitely the lowest manuscript, lowest impact manuscript. So middle author isn't great. And again, this brings up this idea that this author order is where things can get contentious and debated about what should the order be? Who should be first and second and third? How do you quantitate who did the most work and who did the second most amount of work? What if these people were working on totally different types of experiments? What if these people were from different universities? So it's often true that you'll see multiple faculty members. So they're going to jockey for who gets to be last author. And their students, the students that have chosen to work with them, graduate students, undergraduate students, will be probably jockeying for who can work their name farther up the author order list towards first author. So a good rule of thumb for authorship, if you ever get involved in primary research, including in this class, you should think about discussing authorship guidelines with your co-authors, anybody else who's working in the research with you, including, for example, me and the instructor of the class, to decide in advance before things start, what are our criteria for authorship going to be? How are we going to decide? What are the rules? Be explicit, write them out. What are the rules for being an author? And how are we going to decide author order objectively before anything starts? So here's another opportunity, after I've explained this briefly, to use our Google Doc if you'd like to. What about co-first authors? So you'll see here we have Bela and Gabor, and they both have this little yin-yang symbol behind their names. So the numeral 1 tells us their affiliation, what university they're affiliated with, Synthetic and Systems Biology unit of whatever institute. The yin and yang symbol, though, it's down here, says these authors contributed equally to this work. So co-first authorship, or co-authorship, is a relatively new invention, and it's meant to sort of dampen the enthusiasm or the upset feelings about, especially if there are two, say, students in the same year in the same graduate program or the same undergraduate program, and they both did about the same amount of work. How are you going to decide who goes first? Let's just give them both co-first authorships, and they both get to claim that they did equal amounts of work. So please take a moment, go to our Google Doc, and just provide really brief description of what are your feelings? What's your initial reaction about this concept of having two people be co-first author? Pause now and then come back when you've jotted down some thoughts. All right. So I'm going to summarize what I typically encounter for an in-person synchronous discussion about this. Half of the people or more usually say, yeah, that's a great idea. And you could have 3 or more co-first authors. Absolutely. I've seen it. It's been done. Then a few often vocal people will say, well, yeah, but there's still one person whose name is listed first. And the reason that that's important is because when you look at what might be important and sort of negates the idea of a co-first author is that when the citation for this paper is written, usually because there are multiple authors, what would it read? It would read Shamech, I suspect, I don't know if that's how to pronounce, et al. And others, right? So the second author, even though they're a co-first author, has disappeared from the author list in a citation. So we'd say whatever the year was, which I don't know, maybe it was 2,100 and something, and then the title and so forth, right? So co-first author is a nice concept, but there are some ways in which it doesn't really make sense. And that also lets us turn to one of the final topics here, which is that in every manuscript, there's usually an acknowledgement section. After the introduction, materials and methods, results, and discussion sections, there's a place where the authors acknowledge people. And this is from one of my manuscripts. And so I want to explain briefly how I use this, because some of these people didn't qualify as authors based on the rules that we talked about earlier. Matt Rockman, for example, is a faculty member in New York. I had some issues doing some data analysis. So he shared some code with me that he had written in the programming language R, analysis language R, that helped me do some analysis. He didn't do the analysis. He provided support in that way. He provided advice. Likewise, Dr. Matt Hahn provided statistics advice. Another faculty member, Asher Cutter, shared data with us before they were published. So he wasn't an author. He didn't participate in what I and the other people on this paper were doing, but it helped our ability to create a nice manuscript. And then a bunch of other people, all faculty members in this case, for helpful discussions and advice. So this is a place where maybe that Blackout and Bees paper could have acknowledged the contributions of the public school students without actually making them authors. So again, as you go through this course particularly, think about how you might want to distinguish some people as being authors on your group's work versus who you might want to acknowledge for help, advice, assistance, providing reagents. So there's a huge debate occasionally about what if I have a unique, let's say in the context of our class, a worm strain that you have to use to do the research that you want to do, but I'm the only person that has that resource. And I agree to share some of these worms with you. I might ask that you make me an author in exchange for me providing you that resource. That happens a lot, but note that the rules we talked about earlier said nothing about contributions of materials. That does not an author make. Just because somebody gives you something that helps doesn't mean they should be an author. And again, that's something that should be a conversation that happens before research starts, ideally. And to put this in perspective again, here's one more case study. I'm not going to read you the details of this, although you can zoom in if you want to. This is a paper that was published in a research journal. And these are the authors. And then this line here says, this retraction has been requested by the corresponding author, citing authorship concerns detailed below. So here's what happened in a nutshell. One of the students on this paper, I believe it was the first author, Zhang, had been trained in the lab of a earlier scientist, where this person had started doing research and collected data, interpreted data, and then that student, I believe, graduated and moved to the laboratory of a different faculty member where they continued this line of research. And that's where this list of authors comes from, is people associated with this new or more recent or second research laboratory. And if you read the details down here, basically what it says is the faculty member that trained initially that student, where that project had been initiated and all the experimental details worked out and some data collected, had never been asked to be an author on this manuscript. And so that faculty member and all of the other people that had initially worked on this project wrote to the journal and said, hey, we trained this person, they took this research somewhere else, and now they're trying to publish it without all of us. And in this case, that doesn't always win over a retraction. That doesn't always win over the editors of the journal, but in this case it did. And the journal and the authors agreed to retract the paper because of an authorship dispute, that they had either inadvertently or perhaps advertently left off a huge list of people who did meet the criteria to be authors and yet were somehow left off. So you don't want to be in the position of making this kind of a mistake. So that's, I think, enough background information on the nuances and intricacies of authorship to set you on to this next task, which is to create a group authorships contract, which will be due next week on Canvas. And again, the idea here is for you and any group members you may be working with to come up with that authorship guidelines contract, which again, as I mentioned briefly earlier, should specify specifically how your group is going to determine who should be an author and who should not be an author. And second, and equally importantly, how you're going to decide which order the authors will go in. And finally, there's a reference here if you want to go reread the full ICMGJE recommendations for authors and contributors. Thanks very much. I know it's been a long one today, but I hope you learned a lot that's new and will be helpful for you in this class and in the future. Thanks, and I will see you next time.